Hello, world, and welcome to our first night of the BFA Thesis Exhibition Gallery Talks. Tonight we have students from the April 13th to 17th Ohio University Art Gallery. There are 9 students. Thursday will be Trisellini Gallery with, I believe, 7 students at 5 o'clock. And then we're going to repeat the exact same thing for next week, Tuesday and Thursday. Without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our show, Alphabet Soup. I'm going to bring them on here with Moss Nash, starting off the show. Hear from Moss.
Hi, I'm Moss Nash, and this is my installation, Came to Be. The piece is made up of both like the installation as well as some performance work that I'm going to be doing during open gallery hours. And then I also have a lot of smaller prints and zines. There are chapbooks available. You can take them, read them, spend time with them. My work has been primarily based around a series of poetry that I've been writing for about 1.5 years now. It's sort of a personal narrative allegory for symbols and experiences in my life relating to my gender and as well as my mental health and just like my emotional state. I've been assembling a series of artifacts that are also important to both myself as well as prominent symbols and motifs within the work, both the illustrated work and the poetry. So I've got a lot of textbooks and candles. All of the books are books that have influenced me in some way, some positively, some negatively. And I'm trying to think, I don't know. I'm just excited to be here. If you have any questions, you can both ask me now, or you can ask me personally, in person, on Instagram.
Awesome. So we are going to transition now to talking to Emma Campbell.
Hello, I'm Emma Campbell, and I'm so happy to be presenting the show. This is my work. It is entitled On Stitches. It's a series of work including 10 types of muslin and silk drawing types. And I will tell you more about it in a moment with a PowerPoint.
So I would like to start off just reading my artist statement. On Stitches is a reflection on the physical barriers I experience and how they relate to the understanding of emotional trauma. Trauma is a ghost that echoes over my words, veiled and tiptoeing through my emotional landscape in erratic ways. It can be easy to ignore this ghost, to write off its footsteps as thuds of my heartbeat. In time it will crash through the floorboards, feet calloused, splintered, and bruised. I was born with clubfoot, meaning my feet were turned too far inward at birth. I had my first corrective procedure at 3 days old and went through a series of surgeries over the first several months of my life. The last one was at age 7. I know that if I do not continue to keep up with the needs of my body, my feet will only worsen with age. This work is a monument to physical and emotional growth. It's in dedication to the nuanced steps taken that usually go unseen and recognized until years pass and the bigger picture becomes more comprehensible. Through all these works, I'm intersecting my past, present, and future, placing my body, my authority, always behind the veil. By becoming my own ghost, I accept responsibility for my trauma-informed actions and facilitate an empathetic space for healing through self-reflection. When you allow yourself to see through to the root of trauma, you recognize that a great deal of its weight comes from guilt that can instill uncertainty of self. Yearning to understand events out of our control, situations senselessly painful, we tend to turn inward and place blame there. Through this work, I express a yearning to look at myself with empathy and care, to know that every state I exist in is part of a grand emotional life cycle. So Yeah, I will start with the first piece, the centerpiece in the wall here. It's a series of 12 11 by 14 prints. There's cyanotypes on muslin. Each one is a different set of casts that were on my body at one point. Where you're seeing a single one is when I had only one cast change at the time. These were made by contact printing, and the casts were directly placed on the fabric and exposed to UV light. And if you're unfamiliar with cyanotypes, they are a UV reactive process where you, it's a two-chemical emulsion and you coat it on a surface, be it paper, fabric, let it dry. When it's exposed to UV light, this really deep, rich Prussian blue comes out. And I view this piece as a timeline of my traumas, significant set moments in time that I had no control over. They're standard size 11 by 14, evenly, straightforwardly displayed, and to be clinical and documentary, laying out what my body looked like then and what I experienced at those moments. They're simultaneously representative of both hurt and healing, and when you walk by, the fabric shifts, implying that they're not as set in stone as they would appear to be. It's another view of those. Another closer view. And when we pan down, I have a piece on the floor titled Foot Quilt. It's the shadow or the reflection of the previous cyanotype piece, which is titled Past Bodies Recalled. My thesis statement, I wrote that the work overall is in dedication to the nuanced steps taken that usually go unseen, unrecognized until years pass, and that bigger picture becomes more comprehensible. And this piece is a direct representation of that. And that each one was made individually, and I think would otherwise be fairly visually insignificant, but when put together and sewed together, create their own landscape that exists in the context of each other. Making each one require me to stand still outside in the sun for a period of time, so just alone with my thoughts, my bare feet in the fabric, like literally grounding me. And I place a lot of value on the time that I allow myself to sit alone with my thoughts and emotions, because I just believe that you cannot progress in your emotions unless you fully sit with them and take them all in and understand them to all of their depth. I think cyanotype was the perfect medium for this for me because of its resemblance to water with all of the blues. Water is very thematically representative of healing, cleansing, birth. More close-ups of that. And then the final two pieces are silver gelatin prints that solidify my own autonomy in this work, reassuring that I always have inevitable control over my trauma manifestations. On the left, I have my present day legs and feet exposed, expressing anxious feelings that the unhealed parts of me are the most visible to others. And on the right, I hold the weight of my own casts behind a veil, like a covered Madonna, becoming my own caretaker. So through both of these, I express mourning and acceptance of my past and accepting my present and laying the foundation for the future of my healing and well-being. Altogether, this expresses a cycle of healing that I can only hope to continue and learn to perfect over my lifetime. On Stitches is the physical manifestation of the reflective, empathetic space I've created within myself to assure that no matter my stage of healing, I feel deserving of empathy and care and know that I hold so much potential. And thank you. Next up will be Nicole Malcolm.
All right, so I'm Nicole, and I was going to start off with talking about my past inspirations and where my work has started and gone over the last 4 years. Generally, I make a lot of work about my personal experiences and especially my personal growth throughout my time being in Athens. And to kind of elevate that and continue with those themes, I decided to kind of go into installation work and move from a 2D medium to a 3D format where people can immerse themselves in the environment and the story that I'm telling them. And specifically, I wanted to draw from my experiences from my freshman year. That was just a really pivotal moment in my personal growth, and there were a lot of things that helped me figure out myself and learn new things and put myself out of my comfort zone. So freshman year, I kind of went through a difficult first breakup. I moved away to college like we all do, and it was just a really difficult time of feeling like you might have picked the wrong place to go to school. You don't know anyone where you're at. You're looking for new friends, and after going through a breakup and also being in an environment that you're not familiar with, it can be kind of tricky. And there were some things that I did during that time that mean a lot to me to this day. So I would go get coffee by myself, and I would get a vanilla chai from Brennan's and just sit and kind of, sometimes cry, sometimes listen to music, call a friend. And especially I would go to the open mic nights in Baker University Center every Friday evening. And it was kind of a weekly ritual that I kind of did to spend time with myself. And so every Friday night I would go, and a local artist and musician, Bruce Dalzell, opens open mic night. And over the past couple of years, I would walk up to him, introduce myself, and kind of grow that connection with him, and eventually started taking friends and family to meet him and hear the music as well. And as we started growing that connection a little bit, I reached out to him when it came thesis time and asked if he would be interested in writing a song with me and performing it together in order to kind of aid the story that I wanted to tell of my personal growth while being in Athens. And so he had asked me to send him maybe one specific story that I felt like summed up my growth and time here instead of trying to cover everything that happened. So I shared with him that on the last day, or the last night before the last day of my freshman year in the spring, I was in the studio with two of my friends, and we were just kind of scrambling around trying to finish an end of the semester project, and had been like pulling all-nighters, and we were making it fun and had snacks and listened to podcasts. And eventually both of my friends finished, but I still had some to do. And because I was close enough, I decided to just stay in the studio alone and finish up my work. And it was the first time all semester that I really enjoyed listening to music and being by myself. And I felt like the studio was a home for me and that I did pick the right place to be. And it was a really nice, like, confirming moment to have. And when I walked outside, I ended up just kind of sitting down and looking out at the hills and kind of just thinking to myself that everything turned out okay. And I made such wonderful friends that, little did I know I would make all of these incredible memories with down the road. And I just kind of had that nice, quiet, intimate moment to myself that has stuck with me since freshman year. And so that's the story that I sent to Bruce. And I kind of wanted to have a quiet toned song that would feel intimate, like I was telling someone about it, or as if someone was kind of there peeking in on that moment of me having that experience. And that's where we kind of started going with it. And then most of the lyrics that we wrote together really influenced some of the imagery, and I have some detailed images to show of that as well. Okay, so this is an image of the final installation in the gallery that you had seen me sitting in. And then we're gonna go back into my inspiration a little bit and the way that I chose to produce some of the final products. And here are some detail images, and I'll explain a little bit of those as well. So I kind of decided to make the room as well a little bit cozy and messy, as if I was just kind of sprawling out my thoughts and memories, and just kind of creating a place that isn't necessarily a place to hide or retreat away to, but just a place to go to confide in yourself and spend that time and invite people into, to share intimate and similar stories of maybe going through things you're unsure of and similar times and relating in that way. And it's more of just a place to recoup and get to know yourself as opposed to hiding away. And I have a lot of little things in the install. So like a small little story is that the rings on the left are a ton of rings that my friend Kristen gave me over the past 4 years. Anytime I would be upset or cry, she would take off whatever ring she was wearing and put it on my finger and tell me to look at it if I was ever upset. And my friend Megan gave me that necklace because we used to eat Chinese food in the screen studio every night. And the root beer bottles are a reference to a past print that I did about my best friend Marissa and I drinking root beers in a coffee shop in town. And some of my journal images, and if you see the work in person, you're able to flip through the journal itself. And these are just some of the scrapped things that I kept over time. And one of them is a sketch from my first night at Open Mic Night, actually, back in 2018. So I was able to kind of preserve that and end up putting it in something a couple years later. And then the way that our song influenced a lot of my imagery and the work that I produced is these lyrics are so intimate and honest that I had been messing around with paper making, and I really wanted to make something that was translucent and could catch the light and felt really intimate and almost skin-like. So I made abaca paper that was beat for 6 hours, which basically just means that the longer you beat it, the thinner and crispier it is, so you can get a really nice see-through paper that can have some light shine through it. And this is the view from where I sat at the top of Siegfried Hall that night that I kind of sat by myself. And so I wanted to show a little bit of that process and taking photos and drawing imagery from that. And Bruce and I had actually mentioned in the song that because this was during the springtime that this memory had happened, and that's one of my favorite times of year, that fireflies are a really nice little symbol of that time of year and just like this hope. And so I had started putting fireflies on the Appalachian Hills, influenced from that line in the song. And so that became a big inspiration. And that ended up being the outer wallpaper for my install that makes it a little bit more of an immersive space when you go inside of it. And in general, the song ended up being titled I Will Wait For You. And to me, that title really represents the way that everyone in my life, all of my friends and family and professors and everyone that got to know me that semester and still knows me have always been so patient with me, not only during that really tough semester, but during all of them. And so hearing I Will Wait For You, it kind of feels like them waiting for me, and they're always going to be there. And the same way that I was waiting for myself to catch up and get to the point that I knew I would eventually be at. And I wanted to save this to close as well. I ended up titling the work Places You Pass. Mostly I think about how you can go anywhere, you could pass any coffee shop, you could go to a university, you could ride your bike past the street, and you really don't know what's down the road at all, physically or metaphorically, I guess. And you don't know what it's going to mean to you at some point. I really questioned which school I had chosen to go to and was worried about the future like we all are. And I didn't really know how much Athens would play a role in my life. And not only that it would be my senior thesis, but mostly my entire body of work while I was here. And it inspired me a lot. And so you never really know what all of the places that you're going to will mean to you, but they end up impacting your life a lot. And now we are going to go to Holly Barrett.
Okay, good. Okay. Hi, my name is Holly Barrett. I am a studio art BFA with concentrations in ceramics and painting and drawing. And so my body of work that I have with me close to home is a combination of those two practices. Specifically, I'm looking to illustrate how the combination of my own experiences and relationships work with literature that I've read growing up to influence my own identity. I'm really invested in developmental psychology and how much control we have over the people we become, and specifically the way that people can take ownership and be proactive and decide to what extent we let those things influence our own identity and kind of take charge. So what I've done, I have a series of 3 pots and a plate that are all 8.6 mid-fire porcelain, and then I've illustrated using imagery from my own memories and literature as a combination to talk about the way that they work together. So we can go ahead and look at some details, and then I can talk about specific imagery on each pot and how that ties in. So this first pot, If and When, kind of most clearly represents how I'm influenced by 18th century mapping treasure collections, and how I'm looking at clay not only as a medium, but almost as memory objects, and this idea of memorabilia and nostalgia rather than ceramics as something that serves a functional purpose within a common space or the home. The images on this pot, specifically the radishes and the fox and the stork that you then see on the right, are from stories like Mrs. Pigglewiggle, where the girl grows a radish in her forehead and on her arms after refusing to take a bath, and then from the fox and the stork of Aesop's fables. And then the other imagery of these papers, the lists, and the broken Mike's Hard bottles are all from my own experience with sexual assault. And so this whole pot then becomes a discussion on coping mechanisms, how people can use control, or for me, cleaning to kind of cope with stress or difficult times. And so instead of letting things like traumatic experiences or bad relationships, you decide to what extent you're going to let it influence you. You find your own way to cope with it. So this is the other side where you can better see used as deserved as a quote from Aesop's fables. And then I like to use, I'm influenced by several artists, Kathy King from Harvard Ceramics, Jessica Brandel, Patty Chalmers, all people who are very painterly in their approach to ceramics, but Patty Chalmers specifically uses her own imagery to frame her pieces rather than specific borders, and so that's what I do with fabric in each of my pieces. This plate, The Things We Do, is more based on my grandparents and the idea of dedication and how watching my grandparents on my mother's side and their dedication to each other and the way that my grandmother has served my grandpa and him dealing with polio has affected the way that I approach work ethic, how we treat our loved ones, what we're willing to do for other people, and the importance of the little things. And so their connection here is seen through the hen and this idea of wheat, and you think of the story of the little red hen who baked and how my grandmother always gave me baking lessons and taught me how to make bread. And then I also have a kiln in the back right because this work ethic has really bled into my experiences with learning and how I've approached school. The second pot, labeled Sanctuaries, is more about my own experiences with travel and the idea of place. I've always been someone who likes to nest and find communities, and so when I studied abroad in Italy and lived there for 4 months by myself, I really had to change the idea of what a community looks like to me or what a home is. And so you can see in this next slide, it says to be home or the closest thing, and for me that became a place where I can find anyone to talk to, where I feel comfortable, where I wash my hair. And then these flowers, Queen Anne's lace, actually represent sanctuary. And on the left, you can see the hills with the house is imagery from a book, The Stinky Cheese Man and Fairly Odd Tales, which my takeaway from that book, which is something I read when I was younger, is being really proactive and seeking out what you're looking for. And so for me, in Italy, or when I've gone to Ethiopia to visit family, has been really making of the experience what you want to make of it. And then this final pot I love the most is really influenced by my parents, who have been my biggest supporters. And so the geese on the left reference a story, Goosey Goosey Gander, which more discusses the influence of religion in my childhood and growing up in a conservative Christian household and the experience of going from that to a liberal art school. And then on the right, the tree, the giving tree, or my impression of it is a weeping willow because we had a weeping willow in my backyard growing up. And so I don't need much now is also a quote from the giving tree. And it kind of goes into this idea of different relationships and nature versus nurture. Who are you going to surround yourself by? How do your parents and the people around you influence maybe the person that you start becoming? They always say you maybe become the friends that you hang out with. And so my parents are definitely a huge impact in the person I am now, and that will continue. Each of these pots, looking back, they're the mid-fire porcelain, and I carved my foundational lines while the clay was still in its leather-hard stage, so it had not been fired yet. And so I went through with a needle or a carving tool and carved just a surface line, does not go all the way through. Then they were fired once. I would sand them down, and then I would, before firing, I would have filled them with underglaze, essentially paint for ceramics. and then wipe it away, having waxed the piece so that the paint would only fall into my own lines. And then after the first firing, my piece would be bisque ware. It was very white. And so I would go in and do the pointillism, any painterly shading, and get all of my details. I chose pointillism because for me, process is equally as important in the making as it is in the concept. I think about something that my parents always said, you're not a fully baked cookie yet, you're not all the way grown up, you're not who you are, you're still learning and deciding what you're interested in. And so for me, taking the time to sit down and do hundreds of dots, you're really forced to think about what you're doing, even if it's the same step over and over to get to the finish line. And so that ties in that you take the time in the process, just like you take the time to decide what's important to you and what experiences you're going to piece together to decide who you are as a person. And then I used a clear glaze and sprayed it on the pieces so that the underglaze would get slightly darker, but you could see all the imagery because that's definitely the most important part. And then the last thing that's really obvious, especially in this pot, is the cracking. So the cracking was not on purpose. It's a fun fact, side effect of porcelain. And after this pot cracked the first time, I had to sit back and analyze what's important for me to spend my time on, what's important for me to keep learning the rest of this semester or while I'm making this work. And so I decided, instead of switching clays and being able to make the same work over again and not have the cracks, there's this method, it's a Japanese method called kintsugi, and you fill cracks or repair pots with gold leaf or luster, and it's all about embracing your imperfections and the process of how you're becoming something. And so I felt that that really tied in to what I was already trying to address. And so I actually ended up hoping that each of my pots would then crack. So that's what we have, is this is my collection of memorabilia that kind of represents my own experiences and how I've used stories to kind of analyze my own personal relationships. And if you have any questions, just let me know. And if you don't, we'll go ahead and head over to Chip Wagner.
Hi, I'm Chip Wagner. I'm a ceramic major. The title of my project is Inhale Nightmares, Exhale Sunshine. For it, I made this snail and its shell along with setting up this dirt environment. The snail and its shell were both foil built, and then the surface was painted with underglaze. For the dirt around the shell, it's a mixture of the dirt, broken parts of a shell of a previous snail, and clay from the body of another snail too. It's also mixed in with some found objects. These came from just walking around the street and other things. A lot of them are like bottle caps. There's part of a cell phone, some fabric. The hands on the shell, I cast from myself and my friends. And I get to the PowerPoint now to show some up-close images. So the title of the piece came from a mantra that was running through my head. I find it's applicable in many situations. Inhale nightmares, exhale sunshine. It works well with anxiety or depression and sadness pretty easily. I find that it promotes tranquility along with a conscious alertness. The reason I chose a snail is because often in Western culture, slowness is perceived as a negative quality. In capitalism, it goes against the hustle. And as a sin, it's representative of sloth. In this up-close image on the right, you can see a couple of the found objects, a bit of metal, and on the left there's a finger from the previous shell. Another reason I chose a snail is for the symbolism of a spiral. I find that it represents cycles of life, death, and rebirth, and then it also expresses direction and journey. And I find with the idea of inhale nightmares, exhale sunshine, and promoting tranquility, but also alertness, it kind of helps bring about a flow state, something dance-like. In this image, you see a door that I painted along with some people on the left of the snail. Up top, there's a personification of time, which you can see the clock face a little bit. There's another image where you'll be able to see it a little more. For my inspiration, I think a lot of it came from Michael Lucero. I really enjoy his ceramic works. The mixture of sculpture and also painting on the surface is something I find I can connect with. The personification of time is holding a moon in one hand, and in the other hand, it's holding an apple, which is dripping into an ocean. I put the big grin on the snail because I found with this mantra, part of it comes from, I guess with the desire to journey or just keep going, you have to inhale dark things and then just break it down into brighter things to keep going. You can see a couple of the found objects in this. There's a broken bit of bottle, a piece of metal, and a handful of more fingers. On the other side of the snail's body, I painted a dragon. I guess I like the reference to just sort of mythical things and imagination in general. And the last thing, underneath the title, I have this poem, and it's that snails roam but never are homeless. A slimy body slips through a rift. Its shell shatters into fractals. And now we're going to move on to Ava Da Re.
You're good? Howdy, y'all. My name is Ava Da Re. I'm a painting and drawing major, but for my grand odalesque, my thesis for Ohio University, I decided to pursue performance art. I highly recommend that if you have the ability to come into the gallery in person, please come experience our show, all of our work in person. It's awesome that we have the ability to be able to stream this with you, but we also want to be able to share it with you in person. So please come in if you're at all able. To talk about my thesis project, it is to talk about a journey that has been over a year in the making, filled with self-realization, epiphanies, frustrations, anger, and a whole lot of challenges. My senior project is called Hollow Vessels. It incorporates performance art and sculpture. There's not too much that I can really show you other than the eviscerated corpses of the sculptures that I went ahead and destroyed Thursday night, and the kind of grainy video behind me, as I'm sure y'all can see.
So I'm going to pop behind the computer, I'm going to bring up the slideshow, and I'm going to walk you through my process, my work, and all that I did this semester. So to start, I may be a painting and drawing major by training, but I have recently, within the past year and a half, found a love for performance art. I've done a few pieces, particularly with my mother and myself, and every single time I've done a piece of performance art, it explores interpersonal relationships and kind of that cosmic give and take of interacting with another person. And I thought to myself, how can I apply this to what I want to talk about? Well, not even so much applying it to what I'm talking about. A wise person once said that you should fit the medium to fit the concept, which is why I pursued this over any other kind of visual medium. But I thought to myself, this will be a good way to kind of show the audience what I want to talk about. And what I wanted to talk about was this Sorry for the blank there. So typically I speak about my mother and I, but I wanted to branch out, and I figured that performance art could really fit my concept that I wanted to talk about, which was the identity that I both project and feel I have projected on me. There are trappings of being perceived by others. It's a pitfall that we all fall into, in which we feel as though we have to be sexy for someone, we have to be professional for someone. We're constantly feeling as though we have to be something that we may not be. And that's what I, at first, wanted to pursue in this sculptural performance project. And I knew that if I was going to pursue this inquiry through performance, I would have to construct some tools or props. For a few months, I've been imagining false Avas, these kind of stand-ins for myself. Eventually, my want for something figurative, as I had originally imagined it being something painterly or photographic-based, gave way to this idea of these abstracted false selves. I wanted to achieve a jagged exterior that was hard, unyielding, highly constructed, but that translated itself, at least visually, as being flesh-like and grossly corporeal. My material started off as plaster bandage on a removable cardboard frame, which I would then remove and then add construction plaster tinted with pink paint to kind of mimic my own skin. I then covered it in cement wet, which is something that you typically reserve for the outside of pools or garages, but it allowed the plaster to take on a kind of sweaty sheen similar to skin. And of course, my own hair and eventually my own blood. Throughout the process of creating these sculptures and becoming intimate with their construction, I could feel my intentions beginning to shift. When I encountered what I created, it no longer felt like a dialogue between myself and the world and its perceptions of me. It reduced itself to simply a young woman kind of talking to herself, struggling with a continuous stream of thought that felt useless against the physical body. I had no influence, no control over my physical self. There was no control of my performance anymore. I had kind of lost my grip on being an actor, and that's the realization I came to while I was working on these pieces. I no longer had control over how I was being perceived by others. The transaction had become corrupted. It's understandable to feel the weight of how others see you, of how the impressions of your daily performance for them is constraining. Pretending to be something for others that other people want is something that I believe most people can relate to. At the end of the day, we're all kind of consumable, imagining ourselves out to be something that other people want. It's a trap we all fall into. But with the completion of these sculptures, I realized the heaviest constraints weren't necessarily the ones that I felt people were projecting onto me through the transaction of my performance, but they were the ones that I had put on myself. I wanted to perform well, I wanted to have a good performance for the benefit of others. When I dipped below my performance for others, I felt like I no longer had control of my body. Like I said, I was an actor playing a role that they were no longer writing. If I was sad and needed a day to remove myself from my world, abandoning my performance for others, disappointing others around me, my body had then failed me. My internal self knew the importance of keeping charade, but the physical self would no longer play along. The performance I imagined was no longer about me versus the anonymous world. It was me versus myself, the internal self wanting to break the corporeal form, to reach a consensus, an equilibrium, an agreement potentially to go back to the transactional performance I had with others, that comfortable place that I had found myself all my life, or maybe to something new, revolutionary. I no longer wanted to feel like this imagined hollow vessel, a mind floating inside of an unyielding body. I yearned for catharsis, for something new. I wanted to exercise my frustrations. Performance night was on Thursday. I had an audience of one. My friend Emma Fisher, famous photographer in the School of OU, and she was the kind artist that took these still images for me that night. I crawled across the white floor, and I could feel my body, and it felt like it was the first time I had felt my body in a long time. I could feel the weight, the slap of my skin and my knees hitting the floor. I could feel the texture of the sculptures underneath my hands and my hammer as I scraped up against them. And then I began to bash them. I broke them. I broke what I had worked for months and months on. And my knuckles became bloodied. I looked down and my hands were actually covered in blood. I got blood on my dress. And it was the most cathartic thing I had done. It was everything that I imagined it to be. I felt my form. There was a reconnection with the physical body. The internal self merged with the physical once again. There was a reclamation of the moments and the thoughts of failure through their destruction. These sculptures were stand-ins for myself and all negative associations toward myself. It was different. It was good. It was everything I needed it to be and more, because it showed me something beyond what I was looking for, which was destruction and a new start. It showed me that there was still an inclination of a person behind the performance, that I didn't necessarily have to keep performing, but I could if I wanted to. It was everything that I needed it to be. And that's the funny thing about performance. You can try and plot and figure out how your body and how your movements are going to look for the viewer, but in the end, the piece speaks for you. The piece has its own navigation, its own route that it's going to go, no matter what you think or expect it's going to go. And that's how it was for me. I planned for months and months, and it became something so totally different than what I expected. Thank you for listening to my little rambly spiel, and now I believe it is time for the lovely, the darling, the talented Miss Madison Eaglowski.
Hey guys, my name is Madison Eaglowski, and my thesis is titled Silent but Deadly. My work is about my experience navigating a society that is just obsessed with women's bodies. So I'm going to share some more detailed images with you guys, and we can talk about this more in depth. Cool? Cool.
Alrighty. So I use a transactional form of humor to build confidence and value in my identity. I do this because in our society, women with bigger bodies, they just don't have the same social currency as others, and that is just the reality. In my work, I construct scenes with surface level humor and place myself within them. By doing this, I confront my own behavior and expose my inability to identify with the polarized movements discussing these issues today. I use humor as a vehicle and share my own criticism and confusion to invite the viewer to participate in a discussion about the complexity of women's issues as well as their own interpersonal transactions. In this painting, Joke Core, which is 3.5 feet by 5.5 feet, oil on canvas, I lay down a foundation by referencing La Grande Odalisque by which was created in 1814. Referencing this historical painting addresses how our history has created the scene in which my figure exists today, which is very important. But what I'm interested in talking about on a deeper level is the woman in the painting. She's a prostitute. And prostitution is this inherently transactional behavior that I compare to my own use of humor. We're both engaging in this transaction between ourselves and others. The chambermaid uses her body and appearance, and I, in lieu of fitting into this societally prescribed image of how a woman's body is supposed to look, use performance and self-deprecating humor. But what is historically unaccounted for in these transactions is the emotional collateral damage that's a result of this unequal dynamic. The prostitute and the joke whore do this to gain some kind of currency, but ultimately it's degrading and consuming, because when you provide a service, when you engage in these unequal transactions, there's always a cost. While this history is very important, it didn't help me get healthier or make me feel any better. For years of my life, I engaged in dangerous and unhealthy behaviors to maintain my weight. I really do understand how damaging America's standards of beauty can be. But that didn't change the fact that I couldn't feel a real connection to the academic teachings, to fat activism, or to some of these different body positivity movements that I saw. I mean, here are these groups of women and other people that had very similar experiences to my own. They're fighting against different issues that had affected me personally, but I found that I didn't agree with some of the more extreme movements. I couldn't help but notice the way that some body positivity movements would claim to denounce traditional beauty currency and the idea of assigning or subtracting value from someone because of the way that they looked. But in the same breath, they would curate their posts and images to invoke the same response. I just saw it as the same car with different passengers. When I learned about feminism and women's bodies issues in school, I felt like it existed in this condescending, elite academic world that didn't belong in the context of my life, and then in air quotes, the real world, which is embarrassing for me to say, but that's just honestly how I felt. The delivery and the tone of the information made it inaccessible. This made me really question what conversations need to take place to facilitate a healthier society. Through my work, I break the veneer in which we talk about these issues today, so that we can arrive at a more nuanced discourse that represents the complexity of the way that we experience these issues on an individual level. I don't claim to be an expert, and I can only share with you guys what I've experienced personally. For me, it was about feeling torn, conflicted, and confused about the way I heard other people talking about these issues while I was struggling with them myself. It was only the evaluation of my own transactions and interactions with others that allowed me to learn about how I could grow and become healthier. I hope to reach people on an individual level because it is okay and it is necessary to ask questions, to criticize things without fear of judgment. And I invite the audience just to have a conversation. You may be right about some things and wrong about others, but just be open and honest and forgiving in your interactions. I think that's the only way that we can grow into a healthier and happier society. So let's chat. Thank you. All right, guys. Now I'm going to take you over to the fabulous work of Callie Smith.
Hi, I'm Callie Smith. I'm a painting and drawing BFA, and my work in this show is titled Liminal. And as you just saw, this body of work consists of these 4 oil paintings on canvas titled Suspension 1 through 4. And so what I'd love to do now is to give you a little closer look at that work through some detail images, transitioning over to our PowerPoint now and talk a little bit more about the work over there. So for a long time now, I felt suspended in a fever dream. And I think that's something that a lot of us have been feeling. And we've actually all been talking about it over the last year or so, especially. But for me personally, the meaning of this statement is even more literal. My relationship with sleep has become so fraught that I spend a significant amount of time each day in that liminal space between consciousness and unconsciousness. Pulling myself out of sleep in the morning feels like a battle, and letting go of consciousness at night is just as difficult. I end up occupying that in-between space for so long each day that it has become very familiar. So that space is what I'm interested in, because the truth is we're living in a liminal time. The cause of this circadian arrhythmia is very much grounded in reality. It's everything from living during a literal plague under a government which does not care about its people, where there are corporate forces actively and consciously working against any effort we put forth to slow the destruction of our ecosystem. Everything about our waking world feels chaotic and surreal and nightmarish. But the question became, how could I talk to other people about this condition? Because I realized the dilemma was an inability to understand and communicate the nature of this disorienting state, since I was actively suspended in and blinded by it. So in my work, I attempt to capture this state of suspension. In making this work, initially what I try to do is to feel out the space using full body motions with the brush. I hold myself back as long as possible from concrete objects and images, and instead I try to do a more impulsive drawing, letting the conditions of the space speak through me rather than trying to define them myself. And the complexities of this substance are revealed through layers. So at a certain point in layering up this amorphic space, I could begin to feel myself trapped in it in a particular way. And that's when I entered the figure. The figures emerge from their environments as anxious contortions, depicting the physical manifestations of this disorienting experience. They're also discorporate, half-formed. Not only are they occupying an amorphic space, they themselves aren't even fully realized. None of them have faces or heads. They can't perceive their own surroundings or navigate their environment. I also use color to evoke a heightened emotional state. These exaggerated color palettes also contribute to the feeling that these figures aren't existing strictly within our reality. And the marks I use to render them and their environments are varied, bold, and direct.
I allow my brushstrokes to be seen in several areas. This is a choice, not to conceal my hand in making them, but rather to let those marks remain as a record of my process. So as I continue this body of work, I'm asking myself what it means now that we're beginning to recognize that we're caught in this place. And by making this work, am I finding a way out, or am I burrowing into it even deeper? Either way, and even as we may begin to feel our way out of the darkness, I think we'll have to recall our time spent suspended in this uncertainty to fuel us moving forward as we work to craft a less nightmarish waking world. And now, last but certainly not least, we are going to move over to Dominic Mensurati.
Thank you, Callie. I'm not going to be appearing on camera, nor is my work, because it just doesn't make sense. It's a video. And so I'm more or less going to be explaining about our process, the logistics of this production, why we made certain choices, some of the challenges we face in the process, and finally where we stand right now in terms of end products. So the project is called Days in My Heart, and it's a conceptual music video that I directed, shot, and edited this past year in response to my friend and music producer Rex Shiraz's upcoming project. Just a little bit of background about myself, trying to keep it short and sweet. Over the last few years, I've done a lot of still photo work, which has referenced and been influenced by films. Actually, making films was something I hope to transition into after spending some time learning and exploring lens-based media and developing my eye throughout my time here in school. But at last year's end, I learned how to make the most of my educational resources, and I was able to invest in some truly game-changing equipment. Going into my final year, I knew I wanted to make that leap and start working with moving images for my thesis. And that's when my good friend Rex reached out about wanting to make a video to accompany a music production he was beginning work on at the time. So there were a few things that needed to happen before we got started with the shooting process. For one, I had to teach myself how to use all this new equipment. And prior to purchasing, I spent months researching every component, consuming all sorts of instructionals and other informative content that helped me really gain an understanding of what I needed and how to put it to use. I only bring this up because this equipment was really what made this project possible. After just a couple months' time, I obviously was no expert, but I felt comfortable enough with it to begin work on this project. So another thing that we needed was a concept, and after that, a location. So the music was still in its early stages, and we knew that it wasn't going to be an instrumental project. But the only lyrical or vocal aspect that we had to work with at that point was Kip Stone's bit that goes, "Feeling my way through the dark, dazed in a fog, these days in my heart, they done slowed down." So as Rex kept sending me updates to the music, I listened on repeat for several weeks until those lyrics became embedded in my brain. And I woke up from a dream one morning with the perfect location in mind: the underground basement of an old burnt down winery tucked back in the woods on Kelly's Island that I'd spent a lot of time exploring in my childhood. I was beginning to see something happening in that space in my head. I could picture Rex literally feeling his way through the dark in this place, moving in slow motion because of the slowed down lyric. And I don't remember when exactly, but at some point we decided to explore themes of duality or plurality of self, internal conflicts manifesting externally, and with our lyrics and potential location in mind, began to flesh out the idea of Rex being trapped in this dark place and stalked, confronted, and attacked by an alternate version of himself. Thinking about how these characters would look in this environment, we decided to go with a white t-shirt, black t-shirt dynamic as a simple way for us to signify opposites while keeping costuming minimal. For the most part, it would be easy for Rex to change in and out of t-shirts for different shots that would only require his body in frame. However, certain shots in which both Rex and his double needed to be on screen at once were those that presented the real challenges. I knew that executing an alternate self, body double type situation could be done with careful blocking and editing, and that it would prove especially difficult in certain circumstances like action shots where, again, both bodies are on screen and interacting. Whenever possible, I'd try to place our body double Mitchell in the shadows to conceal as much of his face as we could, or try to make sure that I was only shooting him below the shoulders. For this scene specifically, we filmed it twice, knowing that I would be intercutting shots of Rex getting beaten in the white shirt with shots of Rex doing the beating in the black shirt. We didn't have time or the budget to work in any visual effects, so we knew that we had to pull it all off in camera. Certain shots had to be perfectly timed, requiring multiple takes, which were time consuming and energy draining, especially those that involved falling or hitting. And certain shots could only be done once because of makeup requirements and the inability to really clean off Rex and Mitchell on location. There were several challenges the location itself presented us with as well. Getting everybody to the island at the same time was one thing, but transporting all of the equipment out to our location each day was another. There is no easy way to access the ruins, especially carrying several bags full of heavy gear. And we didn't get any permits or anything like that, so in the true guerrilla filmmaking spirit, we had to trespass through private property, trek through brush, and climb over big rocks just to get out there. We were also pretty much a three-man crew most of the time, and on top of that, I was the only one who really knew how to use all the equipment. I was essentially setting up each shot myself. Lighting was another issue altogether, but we made it work mostly using natural light and a couple of battery-powered LED panels to give some boost in the darker areas, thanks to the versatility of our camera in low-light situations. So after setting up the lights and getting my rig put together, I operated the camera, pulled focus, and directed each shot. One other thing we needed to accomplish was to make our location appear to be larger than it actually was. So in reality, the basement that we shot in is composed of 4 chambers, 3 long, narrow ones parallel with each other, and 1 larger chamber perpendicular to the rest. It's a big enough space to explore for 10 minutes or so, but not really big enough to get lost or trapped in. Again, using mindful blocking and editing strategies like filming different scenes using the same walls or corridors shot from different points of view, or even just favoring a 16mm wide over a 50mm lens for certain shots, we were able to make the place feel large and labyrinthine. So, after a week on the island, we wrapped our shoot and then it was time to edit. When it came to sequencing, I essentially just had to respond to certain moments and sounds present in the music which acted as cues. So the music is the backbone, and while the music itself has changed a lot since our first wrap, the arrangement and structure of that backbone has remained consistent, which means that the sequencing has stayed the same pretty much this whole time. In terms of color grading, my goal was basically just to accentuate the earthy tones already present in our environment. Raw footage comes out of the camera looking very flat, so those colors really need to be brought back out and pushed in post. After a couple of months in watching and reviewing our footage, we decided we didn't really like our ending that much. And it didn't make much sense, and so we wanted to do something different that made more sense. We had the time, so we planned to meet on the island again and give it another go. One of the biggest problems we faced this time was that it was a different season outside. There were leaves on the ground where there weren't before, the quality of light was different, but we decided with our new ending that we were going to keep everything within the basement, so it ended up not being as big of an issue as I originally expected it to. Mitchell also got a shorter haircut this time, which allowed me a little bit more flexibility when it came to framing certain action shots. Thank you, Mitchell. So that was last fall, and though the music has evolved a lot since then, the video itself hasn't changed much. Since finishing the actual video on my end, I've mainly worked to create promotional materials for the project, like posters and other graphics, using some stills that we shot in the ruins with prospective cover art in mind. And our official poster is on the right in this slide. I've also been managing submissions to film festivals on Film Freeway, 2 of which have already selected our project as part of their programming this year. Indie Short Fest is a Los Angeles-based competition, and Philadelphia Independent Film Festival is an annual competition. Indie Short Fest is monthly. So we're really excited about these, and we're waiting to hear back from, I think, 3 or 4 more festivals in terms of our submission status. Finally, and specifically for my thesis, I've utilized a booking platform called Eventbrite to arrange 10 limited engagement screenings in the Mitchell Auditorium here in Siegfried Hall, while also giving people the option to view online, which is where the project would live under normal circumstances anyway. I felt that projecting in a gallery space just wouldn't have allowed for a proper presentation, especially because the footage itself is so dark, it wouldn't really look very good on a wall in such a well-lit environment. As the music itself is half the project, and the video itself was shot at 6K resolution, it only makes sense that it should be displayed in a theater setting with a big screen and a capable sound system. So it has long been a dream of mine to have something I've created up on the big screen, and I am so incredibly grateful for every person and circumstance that has allowed me to do this. I just want to end by saying that so much of what we did felt near impossible before we did it, and even though it's far from perfect, I'm just so proud of what we did with what we had, what I learned in the process, and what this means for myself and my very driven collaborators going forward. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and if I've sparked your interest, please do check out our video at daysinmyheart.eventbrite.com and use the password DAYS in all caps. Thank you very much. And so now I'm going to switch back to the live feed. And as a group, we just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I was going to say, countdown. We do 1, 2, 3, thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
See you.
What an amazing group. I am so proud and just so honored to have been your teacher for this year. And I hope you all can make it to the galleries. Please tune in. The hours I put in the chat, and tune in on Thursday for our next version of Gallery Talks with our BFAs at 5 o'clock, same channel. Thank you so much.